Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. As you may know, I am an educational consultant by trade, and I've observed many classes. And in particular, I've observed many teachers asking students questions. And while I'm happy that they're asking students questions, because that means they understand that it's important that students understand what the teacher is doing and has a clear understanding of that. But at the same time, I'm also finding these questions are usually at the basic knowledge level. How many years, how many people, who was involved, what happened, those kind of questions. So there's nothing wrong with those types of questions or questioning students in this way for that purpose. But we are missing a great opportunity to extend the learning that our students are doing. Because those types of questions more or less get at basic level of understanding, those questions are really meant to ensure that our students understand the knowledge that is already out there. But how do we get our students thinking deeply about the content we're teaching, the skills we're teaching? How can we develop their ability to inquire, to be curious about the world in which they live in? For this reason, I'm really excited to be joined today by my next guest, Erik M. Francis, who is the author of Inquiring Minds Want to Learn, posing good questions to promote student inquiry. So, Erik, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Super excited to have you on the show. If you could tell us a little bit more about your journey in education and how did student inquiry and questioning become a particular area of interest for you and the work you do?
First thing about questioning is I've always been a questioner. I have an inquiring mind. I can thank my father for that because my father was somebody who asked questions, and him being a questioner changed a lot of what our world is when it comes to the disabled. My father was one of the unsung leaders and the behind the scene leaders of the American Civil Rights Movement for the disabled. He was always questioning injustices or inequities for people who are disabled. And he did it in a way to get people to think. And he was naturally curious, but he also was somebody who challenged with questioning. So that's what really, really influenced me. And I'm that type of person too. I like to not so much challenge, but also be curious about things, but also challenge people to think about things. So I'm a natural questioner. What I find is that sometimes when you're talking, you're droning on like the way I am right now, that people tune out. But if you ask them a question, you're not assessing their knowledge. You're inviting them into the conversation. You're trying to get their side, trying to get their understanding of it. When it comes to education, this was a second career. I originally started out working in the film industry, and I left. I was in the early 90s, and I left when I was about 25 years old, and I decided to become a teacher. So what does that say about the film industry, that you leave working on a Warner Brothers and Sony lot for a big name producer to be his assistant, and then you want to go into education? And believe it or not, I got paid better as a teacher than I did working as an assistant. Did the route, middle school, high school teacher. I was certified in English. I taught out of my content area, which is how I got more for instructional with questioning, because I didn't know what I was teaching. And the kids would tell me, you're not a math teacher, you're not a science teacher, you're an English teacher. So I was like, okay, fine. I'm going to teach you guys the basics and then ask you to go find the information, teach me, which helped them learn deeper. After that, I went to the State Department here in Arizona, State Department of Education, and that's where I learned about law and policy and really became a lot with expertise in Title I and Title II, which is professional development. Title I serves our low socioeconomic students, and Title III with our English language learners. And 2012, someone put a bug in my ear, said you should consult. So I didn't take the leap. I tippy-toed in. I got an anchor job, consult on the side. And then 2012, it just kind of flipped where I was consulting more than my anchor job. And I've been really blessed to be doing this for the last 12 years. Finally became an instructional leader, presented conferences. One year, publishers saw me and said, "Do you want to write a book?" Did that, and I've been doing that ever since. So my first book was Now That's a Good Question. Then I wrote Deconstructing Depth of Knowledge during the pandemic. My third book, my second was Solution Tree, just came out, as you said, Inquiring Minds Want to Learn.
We're going to hopefully dig into all of those concepts: questioning, inquiry, depth of knowledge. Erik, you're talking about how you got into education, how questioning became an interest of yours in education because of your nature as an individual. Delving into that a little bit more. And I think you more or less foreshadowed or pre-shadowed what I'm about to ask, which is, why should we question, number one, as educators? How should we build questioning into what we do as practitioners? And why is it important to think of questioning in a multitude of ways? In other words, how can we use questioning for different purposes?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it's kind of the traditional way that we use questions in school. What I like to say from a generalized statement is that we teachers, we do three things. We present information, we provide instructions, and then we pose questions primarily to assess. That puts a lot of pressure on somebody to answer. That's why we don't like questions, because if I question you, I'm expecting an answer, or you're pressured to give an answer. And that's not what good questioning is about. What we should do with questions, and my suggestion with this and my recommendation to my books, is that you can use questions to assess learning, but you should also be using questions to activate, to advance, and augment your learning. Like a child between the age of 2 and 5, research shows that a child between the age of 2 and 5 will ask 300 to 500 questions a day, all to their mother. When they start going to school, two things happen. One is brain-based, because their frontal lobe starts slowing down. If you put an MRI in front of a child between the age of 2 and 5, it looks like the 4th of July. It's just lit up. But it starts to slow down once they start to get into the school age. And also, a teacher has 30 of other people's children going, why? They're controlling the question. So what happens what I say, and I do this in a very satirical manner with some sarcasm to change behavior, because that's what satire is about, is that I say we kill questioning in school, because in K through 2, we embrace the questions, because that's how the kids are communicating. That's how adults and children communicate with each other: question and answer. It shifts when we go to school, because if you ever been with a child between the age of 2 and 5, what do they do all the time? Ask questions. When we go to school, the child now is encountering questions, but there's a pressure to answer, and there's a pressure to answer correctly. And it's the first time when a child goes to school that they see an adult look at them with a cock of the eyebrow, like down their nose, and they feel humbled or shamed because they don't know the answer. A lot of pressure for that. So in K through 2, we do encourage it, because kids forget how to ask questions, and they make statements. That's why kids in K through 2 go, "I have a question." Well, what's your question? "I went to McDonald's last night." Okay. Third grade, which is when the assessments start, you have time on task, and we don't have time for questions unless they're about the task. I mean, when my teacher said to me, "Does anyone have any questions?" it was like show and tell time, because I had a bunch. And my teacher used to say, "Questions about what I'm teaching, Erik." Okay. And as we progress through school, we kind of kill questioning, because at first it's the time on task in third grade. Fourth and fifth grade's the social pressure, where the kids are down going, "Duh, are you so stupid?" Or, "Hey, Erik, keep asking questions. We're wasting time." That's what my buddy did in fifth grade. Middle school, it becomes a battle of wills, because now it's not just asking questions, it's challenging, where he's like, "How do you know you're right?" By the time they get to high school, the kids are questioned out. When a teacher says, "Does anyone have any questions?" the kids go, "Nope, I'm good. Just tell me what I need to do to get out of here." We need to ask questions to activate learning, and we need to get the pressure off answering. Answering comes free. I can ask any basic rudimentary question and go Google it. And that's what Google's all about, getting me the answers. ChatGPT can explain the answers. But now we need to ask questions that get the kids to think critically, creatively, understand and use their depth of knowledge in different contexts. What I like to say is that the more the technology advances, the more it challenges us to think deeper. Every time the technology advances, it basically takes away another level where we can move that trivial thinking off our plate and allows us to think deeper. For example, with ChatGPT AI, it explains to us, but ChatGPT and AI can't justify. And you need to use it as a stimulus, not a source. You need to look at it to say, okay, this is what it's presenting to me, but is this accurate? Is this inaccurate? Could I do better? That's all deeper level thinking. So that's what I mean by questioning, is that don't just ask questions to assess, ask questions to activate, advance, and augment their learning.
How can a teacher activate learning through questioning? Can you give us some ideas of some strategies a K-12 teacher can use, and maybe you could break it up by grade band or just in general, that teachers can be doing to move a little bit away from questioning for assessment to questioning for engagement, deeper learning, and extended thinking?
You can't come in and tell people, do inquiry and ask questions. That kills the whole thing, because the whole thing is inquiry. You have to just ask a question. You have to be brave and bold enough to accept the silence also, and accept I don't know. It's okay to say I don't know. There's some people that say, get rid of IDK, have them say something else. No, that's how the student is expressing to you that they need to think deeper. They need more information. I'll ask you, what is 2 plus 2? You'll say, this is like basic. I want you to, because here's the thing, it's not about the answers. It's about how and why you got that answer. It's about why is that answer correct or incorrect? Or it's about what else can you do with the answer? Because like I said, answers come free. So if I said to you, what is 2 plus 2? You would say,
4.
you're right, but why?
I thought in my mind of 2 blocks on one side and 2 blocks on the other, and I put them together, and that makes 4.
So what was the word you used to make them to get 4? You used what? You said you put them together, right?
Correct.
Isn't that what addition is?
Yes.
Putting together? Okay,
Yes.
good. Now you're learning keywords. You see how I'm doing that with inquiry? Okay. So now would you please pick 2 numbers, and notice, watch how I corrected myself. Because I said I want, and then I corrected myself. It's not easy. Even,
Right.
would you please pick 2 numbers between 1 and 10?
5 and 3.
How could you use addition to find the sum of those 2 numbers?
You could have a group of 5 things
Mm-hmm.
and another group of 3 things
Mm-hmm.
and add them together to combine them together.
Good. Remember, it's combined, not grouping. Okay, because that's why a lot of our kids get multiplication confused with addition. Combining means joining together. Grouping means I have this many groups of this. So that's something. So you see how that you do that transferable learning? So now I'm going to ask you this. Could 2 plus 2 equal 5?
What if I said no?
You're right, but why?
Because 5 is the
Mm-hmm.
number that comes after, if I'm thinking of a number line,
Mm-hmm.
and 1, 2, 3, 4.
Mm-hmm.
Next one is 5, and 2 plus 2 isn't 5.
Okay.
I
So
feel like I'm failing your test, Eric.
no, you're doing beautifully. But you see how hard it is to explain it?
It is.
But you're going to take away this experience, because watch, I'm going to say to you, you're right. 2 plus 2 can't equal 5, because 2 plus 2 equals what?
4.
What would I need to do to make it 5?
Add or use addition to add 1.
Good. So you understand the concept of addition. Now, what if I used addition, decimals, and rounding? Could 2 plus 2 equal 5?
Yes, because then it would be a decimal plus a decimal plus a decimal plus a decimal to equal 5.
Right. Or you go, what's 2.3 rounded? 2.
Correct.
Or what's 2.4 rounded? 2. What's 2.4 plus 2.3? 4.7. And you round it. See, it's not about the answer. It's about how can you get the answer and why is it correct or incorrect? I can tell you right now, that whole thing I just led you through, imagine standing in front of 600 Texans at a school in K through 12, and you ask, what is 2 plus 2? And someone in the audience goes, 5. And then I said to them, what do you mean? That's the other way you get people talking. You can say, what do you mean? And she said 2 plus 2 could equal 5. And she did just what I did with you. What is 2.4 rounded? And me being curious, saying, what allows me to do that mathematically? And she said, that's what it is to work with triangles. But you see how my curiosity of learning turned that heckling situation into a learning experience? That's the whole thing. So one of the things is this: answers come free. Be affirm to the kids. You're right, but why? So watch this. I'll do you another one. Who was the first president of the United States?
George Washington.
What do you mean?
He was the first president after the United States declared independence and elected him president.
That's the key word. That's the answer I was looking for. He was elected. What if I told you that there were actually 8 presidents appointed before him under the Articles of Confederation? Now I got your interest and curiosity into this. But you see how I also presented it? What if I told you? I didn't say there were 8 presidents before Washington. Now I basically put you off because I'm a know-it-all. And basically I'm just telling you. But what if I told you? That's the other trick. So 2 things you get to get the kids really thinking in inquiry. When they give you an answer, you're right, but why? Ask, what do you mean? So they can elaborate or even correct themselves. Because if you said 2 plus 2 could equal 5, I'd say, what do you mean? And then you say, well, when I have 2 and I have 2 and I put them together, oh, I get 4. See, now you're not doing the Alex Trebek. Ooh, sorry. How much did you bet? Your GPA? Sorry about that. So that's another thing about with inquiries. How do you use this question? How do you lead them and guide them and support them through questioning? The other thing is you could just walk in your room and ask a question. So one of the things I do is sometimes my kids used to notice I'd rub my chin and they would smile because they know they're going to get the question of the day. So how did Edgar Allan Poe create an entire genre of literary fiction? What if I told you that he was the first person to write a short story featuring a detective or a sleuth who used deductive reasoning and logic to solve a crime? What classic character does that sound like?
Sherlock Holmes.
Okay. Well, what if I told you that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle actually based Sherlock Holmes on a character that Edgar Allan Poe created in a story called Murders in the Rue Morgue?
Well, now I'm interested and I want to go find out more about that story by Edgar Allan Poe.
Right. And then I used to have the kids, I'd go beyond my textbook and kids would have access to it. I'll tell you also, that also controls with this thing and turns it into a tool for instruction, not a weapon of mass distraction. For those of you listening, I'm picking up my cell phone. It is a tool for instruction. Googling is a way of life. If you can ask a question that the kids can find on Google, it's a good question. That's what a good question does. It basically stimulates thinking, different levels. You can use it to check for and confirm knowledge, understanding, awareness. You use it to expand knowledge and extend thinking, like I just did with you. You can pique curiosity, imagination, interest, and wonder, encourage students to express and share their learning, prompt them to reflect before responding, and pose the instructional focus, not as a learning target and objective, but as a question that sets the instructional focus and invites them into the learning.
It would be hard for me to think of those how questions, why questions, explanation, or asking students to give me an explanation on the spot. So if I wanted to plan that or plan the questions, the higher level questions I was going to ask my students, are there any resources or tools that will help me to plan that? Because I think that that would be tough to get to those higher level questions if I'm doing it on the spot.
I wanted everyone to have the pressure off them. To ask people or require people, I want you to ask deeper questions. I want you to ask better questions. is like me saying to you, I want you to paint the Sistine Chapel on the ceiling of your classroom. It takes a lot of critical and creative thinking. It is not just academic, it's not just intellectual, it's social and emotional. It's that how do you use questioning? It is a way to learn. It's creativity. You really have to be quick and creative. You have to be courageous. You have to be okay with the silence. You have to be okay when the students can't respond. It really takes a lot of talent. So, but talent is something that's learned. A skill is natural, but a skill can be honed. And we are all natural questioners. We need to tap into that curiosity we had as a child. One of the things I do, and I train people on, is how do I change my delivery? How do I change my approach? How do I change how I present? Every time you want to make a declarative statement, put what if I told you in front of it. The Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared because it's half a square. What if I told you that the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared because it's half a square? And what if I told you that if I can know it's a right triangle based upon whether those two legs will equal the hypotenuse? Now I'm inviting you, because if I taught you that, you tone out, because I'm inviting you into conversation. So every time you want to lecture, say, what if I told you? And that's actually what I'm doing a lot in my PDs now, is I said, I want you to write something on a Post-it, teach me something. Now, when you stand up to teach it, I want you to say, what if I told you before that statement? It's a whole different dynamic. So that's one way to do it. The other way is take your standard, which is a statement of objective. It's not a question. It's an imperative statement that says, do this. Put one of three question stems in front of your standard. So let's just take one. Fluently multiply multi-digit numbers using an algorithm. That's the objective. If I put how do you in front of it, now I have how do you fluently multiply multi-digit numbers using an algorithm. Now I have a standards-based and student-centered question that I can use for assessment. If I put how can you fluently multiply multi-digit numbers using a standard algorithm, now I can put that up on the board instead of a learning target that says I can, because now I'm inviting them. I'm not just putting the words in their mouth. If I said, how could you fluently multiply multi-digit numbers using a standard algorithm? Now it's inquiry, because now I'm wondering, is there more than one way to do it? And there is. And when some people say to me, excuse me, if some people say to me, well, can't I just say, how could you, for assessment, instruction, and inquiry? And I say, yes. And that's the discovery I want teachers to have. So the other thing is that this is the kind of joke I say, if the kids are going to go on AI for answers, let's go on AI and get the question. One of the things I do is I teach the teachers, because you got to be very specific, because there's these AI programs out there that will say DOK question generator, and it'll come up with something. First of all, it's not a question. And secondly, we don't even know if that's the accurate DOK level. Like I always say, when I see things like Magic School or Quizlet, oh, they can generate DOK questions. I always ask who's vetting it, because that's how we got the DOK wheel. No one vetted it. So what I give people, and I talk about this in the book, put this statement in. What are good questions? What are good questions students could inquire, investigate through a deep inquiry into, and finish the statement with either the subject you're teaching, the standard you're addressing or assessing, topic or a text you're reading. That will give you, AI will give you the questions. You can look at it and go, that's a good question. But at the same time, challenge yourself. Can I make a better one?
Speaking of that, Erik, making better questions. I know you're not a huge fan of the DOK wheel. So let's address that. Let's address the elephant in the room. That is one of the tools, whether rightly or wrongly, educators have been used to generating questions. Now, the wheel has been around for a while. I think you're highlighting how AI might actually help us do a better job with creating questions. I have had an episode on using AI. I've seen folks use DOK question stems documents. I've also seen folks use the Hess's Cognitive Rigor Matrix, which is a combination of Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge. How do you feel about those tools?
best one and the most accurate one is the Hess Matrix. That's how I learned about DOK. Excuse me. That's how I learned about what it really is and what it really stands for. Karen Hess influenced a lot of my work, a lot of my ideas I have about DOK. The problem with the Hess Matrix is we Danielson framework it, which is we give this impression that everybody needs to demonstrate and communicate their learning or comprehend and communicate their learning at a DOK3 or DOK4. DOK1 is bad and DOK2 just don't stay there. It is not a value judgment. It defines what exactly and how deeply the students must understand and use their learning to demonstrate proficiency or perform successfully. Karen says when you determine the DOK level of a standard, that's the ceiling of assessment. That you now know that that's the deepest level. A standardized assessment should assess the kids. They won't assess them beyond it because that's unfair. And they won't only assess them at it because it's too difficult, because an assessment assesses range of learning. So you'll have items on there that are DOK1s and DOK2s and DOK3s if that standard is a DOK3. That's the other interesting thing about DOK. It was never meant to be an instructional method and model. Norman Webb created it as a criterion for alignment studies. He is a psychometrician. He's a test person. He's a statistician. He's not a teacher. And in terms of the fact that he's not talking about creating instructional experiences, he's looking at it from an evaluative standpoint to say, what is the level of this standard activity or assessment item? And the DOK levels are rating scales, 1, 2, 3, or 4, based upon the demand, what exactly and how deeply. So it was never taxonomy, and it was never meant for teaching. I'm actually bringing that concept back because we have a lot of teachers, unfortunately, out there who are pulling stuff off teacher-paid teachers and AI, thinking that this is addressing and assessing the standard, but it may not be fully aligned and acceptably aligned. It may be insufficiently aligned. That's using the web phrase. So can you use DOK to determine the level of the standard and then look at that activity and see which objective in that standard does that activity or assessment address and how closely does it address it? So you brought up the DOK wheel. It's not a matter of not liking it. It's that it's inaccurate. And I'm asking people, let's rethink. There's new data and information. First, Norman Webb on Edutopia, everyone look it up. He finally wrote an article, how to use Webb's depth of knowledge. And he says, I didn't create that wheel. And it's misleading. It's not accurate. It's not another way to do Bloom's. The other thing is what depth of knowledge has become is different than what it originally intended to be. So Norman created it as a criterion for alignment studies. Now Norman will tell you it's a language that tells you what exactly and how deeply students must understand and use their learning. Karen Hess turned it into a measure of cognitive rigor and said the DOK levels establish the ceiling of assessment. I turned it into a method and model for teaching and learning. I made it an RTI, where you start with the standard, tier to the DOK level where students are, and teach, and so guide them to rise to, reach, and go beyond that DOK bar. DOK is not about the cognition. It's about, or the thinking. It's about basically how deep, what exactly and how deeply do you have to comprehend, communicate, and consider what you're learning. And what I like to say is the rigors in the response. So tying it back to questioning, if all your student has to do is answer the question, it's a DOK1. It's a DOK1. Doesn't matter how hard it is. All I have to do is answer a question. Math, apply an algorithm, or perform an operation, it's a DOK1. A DOK2 is you have to explain and express how you got that answer. That is where you're expressing your opinions. That is where you're explaining how you attained that answer. A DOK3, you're justifying or verifying why the answer is accurate or inaccurate, or you're considering and critiquing, considering being creative thinking, critiquing being critical thinking. The easiest way to do a DOK3 is to give the kids the answer and ask them, why is it correct or incorrect? When I taught math, I used to give the kids the answer key as their assessment. And I said, okay, there's all the correct answers. Why? A DOK4 is where you explore and extend. This is where you go deep within a subject area. You go across the curriculum. You go among texts and topics, multiple texts and topics. You go beyond the classroom. It's not project-based learning. It's basically extensive. It's extensive in terms of the talking. It's extensive in terms of the transfer. You're not going to do a DOK4 in one classroom sitting.
I mean, would you say that, because you were talking before about where teachers should live, quote unquote, right? That in the past we thought about it as, well, teachers should live at a DOK level 3. But if I'm hearing you correctly, it really does depend on what the standard is asking students to do. And some standards are going to require students to be at a level 3 to meet that standard, where other standards might be at a level 2, let's say.
The delivery intensity of your instruction with teaching and learning for DOK depends upon the demand of your standard and the strengths of your students. We are responsible as educators to get the kids through the standards. What I mean by that is that it's also a way we need to look at standards. Standards, what I say, is the finish line for demonstrating proficiency. That's what it means to demonstrate proficiency in this grade level, in this subject, with this content. This is what it means to be a 5th grader in English language arts working with Central Idea. You start with the standard, but then you need to tier where the students are. That's where it's responsive to the student. I got to get them through the standard, but I need to tier to where they are. Not searching for gaps, but searching for strengths. Can you do this? No. Can you do this? No. Do you know this? Yeah. Then let's start there. So you build on the student's strengths. Can you do that? Yeah. Build on it. I got to the standard. I go beyond the standard. When you go beyond the standard, or you go to a deeper DOK level beyond the standard, it's just good teaching. But you can't say, so you need to teach at this DOK level. No, I'm responsible for teaching the standard, but I'm responsive by getting the kids to, through, and beyond the standard. So there's some teachers like, hey, I just taught the standard. Okay, great. But did the kids learn the standard? That's another question you have back there. The other thing is, administrators should not tell the teachers, you need to teach at a deeper DOK level. Because guess what? They are. Because think about what I said about DOK. DOK2, you're explaining. And when a teacher explains, that's basically them teaching at a DOK2. DOK3 is where you have to justify or verify. And when a teacher can validate why they're accurate in their teaching, that's a DOK3. Teachers know, the great thing about teachers is that we can make all these amazing connections between the curriculum, the content, and the real world, and really make it relevant. Well, that's a DOK4. So I tell all administrators, and I tell teachers, you are all teaching at deeper DOK levels, because you can explain what you're teaching. You can justify why it's accurate and inaccurate, and you really know how to make these incredible connections between your content, your curriculum, and the real world. But what's the level the kids are learning at? If I came in and did a PD and I presented the whole time and I talked the whole time, I'm teaching at a DOK4. Why? Because I wrote a book on DOK, and because I created this George Lucas, James Cameron type of presentation on DOK. And I am basically expressing what DOK is in a very extensive and creative manner. I'm teaching at a DOK4. You're all listening at a DOK1. So it's not you need to teach at a deeper DOK level. What's the level the kids are learning at? And that's the other thing I did with DOK. It's not about how you're teaching. It's about what exactly and how deeply are the kids learning.
That's the key, because we want to equalize it a little bit more, right? To get the kids doing more of that heavy cognitive lift. How can, looping it back to questioning, how can questioning help our students process at those higher DOK levels? And what are some other ways that teachers can have students learning at the higher DOK levels? Because to your point, teachers are teaching at those different DOK levels all the time. And if they are making those connections to real world relevance and other subjects, that is a DOK4. And that's great. But at the end of the day, when our kids leave that classroom, how do we get them doing that strategic thinking?
What I like to say about DOK is that, and questioning, is that DOK is the concept. Questioning is the practice and process to get to the deeper DOK levels. This is the hard part doing PD with teachers with DOK. With DOK, it's about not so much what are you doing, but what exactly and how deeply do you have to do it? The more the kids communicate the depth and extent of their learning, the more the kids take charge of their learning, the more the kids make connections with what they're learning. That's the deeper DOK level. What's interesting is the deeper the DOK level you go, the less you will do as a teacher. Like if you think about what I just told you about, I'm going to give you the assessment. Here's all the answers. Why are they all correct? Who's got the cognitive load? The kids. When I say to you, what's the answer? And then say, you're right, but why? Or what do you mean? Now the cognitive load's on the kids to explain how they know what they know. Kids don't remember stuff. They remember experiences. What they remember is the communication and interaction with the learning. Planning for a DOK teaching and learning experience is about shifting time. Now you're not spending all this time to plan an elaborate activity that never turns out the way we planned it. Now you're planning it to say, how can I get the kids to really communicate what they're learning? How does the outsiders address the idea of family? So what's a family? What's the legal definition? What's the dictionary definition? What's the religious definition? What's the social definition? So as we read chapter 2, how does this address family? Who's the family? Who's related? Pony boy, soda pop, dairy. But what does he think about his friends? They're like his brothers. So how does it address the theme of family? Family is not just who you're related to. Family is who you're close to. What do you mean? Well, this is the kids, not me. That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. Kids can think. You just got to get them to want to think. And you don't have to be the cool teacher, but you can be the connected teacher. Questioning. If you just want them to answer, ask a question where all they have to do is answer. If you want them to explain, you have to ask them, what do you mean? How do you know? You're right, but why? If you want them to justify or verify, give them the answer and ask them why it's correct or incorrect. If you want them to explore and extend, I mean, it's as simple as saying, like in math, I would say, so how could you use multiplication with multi-digit numbers in the real world? And they bring it back and they teach everybody.
Mhm.
Okay, bring the outsiders. Here, you can read either text, you can read Rumblefish, you could read That Was Then, This Is Now, which is the unofficial sequel to The Outsiders. The kids go, there was a sequel? Yeah. Wow. Okay. Pick one of those to read on your own and do an author study on S.C. Hinton. Or here's I'm teaching Shakespeare. How is Brutus and Macbeth, examples of Shakespearean tragic hero, and what are their similarities in their temptation, their status, their temptation, their fall from grace, their fate, their destiny, and a role their wives play? And then that's a DOK4, which is one of them, Brutus. If I said, how is Brutus a Shakespearean tragic hero based upon the following? That's a DOK2 or 3. But because I'm going multiple texts, that's a DOK4. Now I bring in Anakin Skywalker. How are Brutus, Macbeth, and Anakin Skywalker examples of a Shakespearean tragic hero, and what are the similarities? When I do that with the kids, they would realize this is the same story. It's just a different set. I go, well, is there anything different? And the kids go, yeah, Anakin's wife didn't push him to the dark side. And the Star Wars fan always goes, no, Padme knew that Jedis couldn't marry and they couldn't. If he wasn't overt like Lady Macbeth at Calpurnia, that's what you want. And then you ask them and give student choice. DOK4. So let's talk about, it's not even just about rigor. Let's talk about the SEL and the DEI of DOK. DOK2 is the social emotional level, because this is the level you're going to ask the kids, what do you think? How do you feel? What do you believe? You're going to ask for their opinion. It's the affective domain of Bloom's taxonomy. I like to say DOK4 is the equity level, because equity does not mean everybody gets access to it. That's equality. Equity means everybody can access it in their own unique way and by why they are who they are. So if I'm reading Charlie and Chocolate Factory and everybody's reading Charlie and Chocolate Factory, that's equality. But then when I say to you, okay, now I want you to pick your own Roald Dahl book and I want you to do an author study on Roald Dahl, that's equity, because now you're accessing it in your way.
Erik, is there anything we haven't discussed?
Everything starts and stops with the standard. And it's very hard, and it's a tenuous thing when you talk about standards. But that's what it means to demonstrate proficiency, whether we like it or not. What happens a lot of time, what I'm seeing a lot of time, is that people are saying, how can I get the standard to fit my curriculum and instruction? That's not the way it should be working. It should be to rethink it. How can I get my curriculum instruction to address and assess the standard? Our responsibility is to get the kids through the standard. Our responsiveness is to get the kids to, through, and beyond it.
Erik, where can people find out more about you and the work you do?
You can go to my website, Maverick, Maverik, not CK. I'm not Tom Cruise. Maverik, education.com. So it's Maverick, Maverik, education.com. On Twitter or X, I am Maverick, Maverik, edu12. My email is my first name, Erik, E-R-I-K, at Maverick, Maverik, education.com. If you go to my webpage, there's a chat bot there. I'll answer it. I'm very responsive like that. And again, conversations, come free. So please contact me if you have any questions. If you're interested in PD, that'd be great. Just make the connection.
Thank you so much for your time today. This was great.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.